I was a chef in a five-star hotel, but the guests weren't human. The first thing that felt wrong was the smell. Not in the dining hall, not in the lobby, in the meat locker. I remember standing there at 4:30 in the morning with a flashlight between my teeth because the backup lights were flickering again. The compressor kept cutting out for half seconds at a time, throwing the whole room into darkness before roaring back to life. At Blackwater Summit Resort, problems like that weren't supposed to happen. Five-star mountain resort, private ownership, politicians, tech billionaires, foreign investors, the kind of place where rich people paid obscene amounts of money to feel isolated without sacrificing comfort. I'd worked there for almost 3 years, long enough to know every kitchen noise, long enough to know when something was off. And that smell was wrong, sweet, rotten, warm, like something breathing under wet fabric. I moved my flashlight across the shelves, prime cuts, imported seafood, crates of produce. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed the tray sitting by itself near the back wall. No label, no inventory tag, no delivery sticker. Just stainless steel, covered. I pulled the cloth back. The meat underneath looked gray, veined, almost swollen. I thought somebody had screwed up a shipment, maybe old lamb, maybe spoiled venison. Then the surface twitched. Not movement from settling, not dripping. It flexed. I dropped the tray so hard it slammed against the freezer floor. "Chef?" I turned. Luis stood in the doorway holding inventory sheets against his chest. 19 years old. Dish pit kid promoted too fast because the resort couldn't keep staff during winter season. "You okay?" I stared at the meat. It wasn't moving anymore. I told myself exhaustion could do strange things. Double shifts, no sleep, too much caffeine. So I kicked the tray under the shelf. "Spoiled delivery," I said. Luis wrinkled his nose. "Smells like roadkill. Get maintenance to fix the freezer lights. Already called them twice." I shut the locker harder than necessary. That should have been the warning. Maybe it was, but kitchens train you to ignore discomfort. You push through burns, exhaustion, panic, humiliation. You normalize pressure until your instincts stop talking. By 6 in the morning, breakfast prep had started. The kitchen sounded alive again. Knives on boards, steam vents hissing, pans clanging, orders firing. And for a while, I convinced myself the freezer incident wasn't real. Then the guests arrived. Not all at once. Black SUVs, tinted windows, no luggage handlers, no photographers. The resort had been partially bought out for a private corporate retreat, according to management. Closed guest lists, high security, non-disclosure agreements. We'd hosted strange wealthy people before. That wasn't unusual. But these guests never smiled, never looked tired, never looked distracted. They moved like synchronized performers pretending to be human. Perfect posture, minimal blinking, slow eye contact. I first noticed them during breakfast service. A woman in a cream-colored coat sat alone near the eastern windows. She ordered poached eggs, fruit, black coffee. The server brought everything exactly as requested. An hour later, the plates were untouched. Coffee cold, eggs intact, fruit drying at the edges. But the woman kept staring out at the mountains like she'd forgotten food existed. I asked Mia about it during line reset. Mia had been front of house manager since before I arrived. Sharp, controlled, never panicked. "Table 12 didn't eat," I told her. She checked the ticket. Neither did 14 or 9. "They complained?" "No." She lowered her voice. "They keep ordering, though." I looked up through the service window. 3 more untouched tables. Perfect meals. No bites taken. "Maybe they're rich enough to waste food," I said. Mia didn't laugh. "You notice their hands? What about them?" "Cold." I shrugged. "I shook hands with one earlier," she said. "Felt like touching marble." Then she leaned closer. "And none of them have checked out of their room since arriving. Not once." The lunch rush started before I could respond. For the next 6 hours, the kitchen drowned in movement. Orders stacked, staff shouting, heat climbing. Normal. Beautifully normal. But every time I looked through the pass window, those guests were there, watching, still, not eating. By nightfall, snow had started falling outside, heavy enough to erase the road down the mountain. The private guests requested a midnight banquet. No menu restrictions, no budget. Just one instruction. Everything had to be served rare. I should have walked out that night. Not because of the banquet request. Rich people asked for stranger things every season. It was because of Elias. Elias Voss owned Blackwater Summit, and until that evening, I'd only seen him twice. He rarely visited the property, stayed hidden behind executives and lawyers. But around 9:30, while we were preparing for the banquet, he walked directly into my kitchen. Conversations stopped instantly. Even the dishwashers noticed. Voss looked too healthy. That's the only way I can explain it. Not young, not athletic, healthy in a way that felt unnatural. His skin looked almost polished. His gray suit had no wrinkles despite the snowstorm outside, and his eyes moved across the kitchen with surgical calm. "Chef Daniel Mercer," he said. I wiped my hands. "Mr. Voss?" He studied the prep tables, the sauces, the carving station. "My guests are very important," he said. "We're prepared." "I'm sure you are." His voice never rose above conversation level, but every employee nearby went quiet trying to hear him. "Tonight requires discretion," he continued. "No photography, no interruptions. Service staff limited to essential personnel only." "Understood." Then he looked directly at the raw tenderloins on the butcher block. "And no overcooking." I nodded. He smiled slightly. "You understand hospitality, Chef Mercer. That's why you're still here." Still here. Strange wording. Before leaving, he placed a sealed envelope beside the cutting board. Inside was more money than I made in 2 months. Cash. No explanation. Mia saw it after he left. "That's not a tip," she said quietly. I closed the envelope. "Then what is it?" She looked toward the dining hall. "Insurance." The banquet started at midnight. Only 12 guests attended. No music, no conversation. Just silverware, glass, the fireplace. I stayed near the kitchen entrance, overseeing service personally. Luis handled plating. Mia coordinated floor staff. At first, everything seemed manageable. Then table 3 requested replacement steaks. Not because the meat was bad, because it had been cooked too much. The center was nearly raw already, cool enough that most customers would have sent it back for safety reasons. But when the plate returned, the meat looked dry, like it had been left under heat lamps for hours. "How long was this at the table?" I asked. The server swallowed. "Less than 4 minutes." I touched the steak. It felt brittle. Then another order came back, and another. Always the same complaint. Too cooked. I finally left the kitchen myself. The dining hall had gone strangely quiet. All 12 guests were watching me. Not aggressively, not openly. Just waiting. The woman in the cream coat tilted her head slightly. "Chef," she said. Her voice sounded practiced, like she'd learned it recently. "Yes, ma'am?" "Freshness matters." I forced a professional smile. "We can prepare a replacement immediately." She looked at the others before answering. "We would appreciate that." No one blinked. I returned to the kitchen, trying not to show how unsettled I felt. Luis noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "That's a lie." I started slicing new cuts. Then the power flickered. Every light in the kitchen dimmed. For 1 second, darkness swallowed the room. And in that second, I heard chewing. Wet, fast, animal. The lights returned. Everyone froze. Mia looked toward the dining hall. Did you hear that? Nobody answered. Then one of the servers screamed. Not loud, short, sharp. We ran into the hallway. The server stood outside the banquet room, trembling so hard she could barely point. Inside, the guests remained seated, perfectly calm. But table 7 was covered in blood, and the server assigned to it was gone. No body, no struggle, just an overturned wine glass and a trail of red drops leading beneath the tablecloth. Elias Voss stood near the fireplace. He looked annoyed more than alarmed. Kitchen accident, he said smoothly. Nobody believed him. The woman in the cream coat smiled at me. Her teeth looked too long. Please continue service, she whispered. That was the moment I understood something inside Blackwater Summit wasn't pretending anymore. And outside, the snowstorm had already buried the road down the mountain. The resort officially entered lockdown at 1:15 in the morning. Management called it a weather precaution. Nobody believed that either. By then, rumors had spread through every hallway. A missing server, blood in the banquet room, security refusing to answer questions. The staff cafeteria became a pressure cooker. Housekeepers whispering, bartenders checking phones that had lost signal hours earlier, kitchen staff chain drinking coffee just to stay moving. I sat beside Mia near the vending machines while Luis paced in circles. We call the police, Luis kept saying. Phones are dead, Mia replied. Then satellite office, security radio, something. Nobody answered him. Because we'd already tried. Every external line from the resort had gone dark. Maintenance claimed the storm damaged communications towers, but Blackwater Summit had emergency redundancies worth millions. Systems weren't supposed to fail this completely, especially not all at once. I looked toward the cafeteria television mounted in the corner. No news signal, only static. Then for half a second, an image flashed through the interference. A crowded airport, people running, someone collapsing. Blood. Then static again. Luis saw it too. You saw that, right? Nobody responded. Mia stood suddenly. Daniel, come with me. She led me through the service corridor toward administrative offices. The resort felt wrong after midnight. Too quiet. The luxury atmosphere had vanished. No piano music, no guest chatter, no warmth. Only the hum of generators beneath the floors. You know something, I told her. Not enough. Mia, I checked the guest registry earlier. She kept walking. Most of those names don't exist. I frowned. What do you mean? No online records, no corporate profiles, nothing. It's like they were invented yesterday. We stopped outside the executive elevator. And Voss? I asked. Mia hesitated. I think he's been preparing for this for months. The elevator dinged. 2 security guards stepped out. Both armed. That alone scared me more than the blood. Blackwater Summit avoided visible weapons around guests. Always. But these guards looked terrified. One of them recognized Mia. You shouldn't be up here, he muttered. What happened to Chloe? Mia asked. The guard's face tightened. Go back downstairs. Did they kill her? The second guard interrupted. Nobody leaves staff quarters tonight. Orders from Voss. Since when does Elias Voss run security? Neither answered. Then something hit the elevator doors from inside. Hard. All 4 of us froze. Another impact. Wet. Heavy. The first guard slowly raised his weapon. Get downstairs, he whispered. The elevator indicator showed movement. Descending. But nobody had pressed anything. The doors trembled. Then suddenly opened. Blood covered the walls. A security officer lay folded against the corner panel with his throat torn open. And crouched over him was one of the banquet guests. A man in an expensive black suit. Except his jaw no longer looked human. It hung too wide, skin split near the cheeks, teeth moving in layers. He turned toward us slowly. His eyes were cloudy white. Luis would later call them infected, but at that moment the word zombie never entered my mind. Because zombies are supposed to look dead. This thing looks starving. The guard fired first. 3 shots. The creature slammed backward against the elevator wall. Blood sprayed. But it stood again immediately. Fast. Far too fast. It lunged. The second guard screamed as the thing crashed into him. Both disappeared into the hallway wall. I heard bones hit marble. Mia grabbed my arm. "Run!" We ran. Behind us came gunshots, then choking, then silence. When we reached the service stairs, the emergency alarm finally activated. Not fire, not evacuation. Containment breach. I'd never heard that alarm before. Neither had anyone else. Panic destroys luxury faster than fire. Within 20 minutes, Blackwater Summit stopped feeling like a resort. Guests flooded hallways carrying luggage. Staff shouted over each other. Someone broke a champagne bottle trying to pry open locked exit doors. And through all of it, the alarms kept repeating the same message. Please remain inside designated safe zones. Security personnel are responding. Nobody saw security anymore. I found Luis near the lower kitchen loading dock barricading doors with sacks of flour. "Where's Mia?" he asked. "She went to get the survivors from the West Wing." Luis looked pale. There was blood on his sleeve. "Is that yours?" He shook his head too quickly. "One of the bartenders got attacked upstairs." "Attacked how?" He stared at me. "You already know how." That silence between us mattered. Because saying it aloud would make everything real. Then somebody started pounding against the loading dock door. Not scratching. Pounding. Human rhythm. "Help me." Female voice. Luis moved instantly. I grabbed him before he reached the lock. "Wait. She's alive." Another slam. "Please." I looked through the narrow security glass. A housekeeper stood outside in the snow, uniform soaked red near the stomach. Behind her, darkness swallowed most of the parking area. Then shapes moved. Fast. Low. The woman began crying. "Please open the door." Luis shoved my arm away. "We can't leave her out there." The shapes behind her suddenly stopped, like animals scenting food. The woman's crying stopped too. Instantly. No transition. No breath. Her expression flattened. Then she looked directly into the window and smiled. Her jaw split open. Something slammed into her from behind. The glass exploded red. Luis stumbled backward, vomiting. I locked the secondary steel shutter manually. The pounding outside intensified immediately. More than one body now. The metal shook under impacts. And mixed within the noise were voices. Not screaming. Repeating. "Open the door." Over and over. Like they'd learned the phrase without understanding it. We retreated into dry storage where nearly 30 staff members had gathered. Some crying, some praying, some pretending none of this was happening. A finance executive named Randall kept insisting it was a terrorist attack. Drug-induced violence, he said. Probably some kind of bioagent. Nobody argued because nobody had better answers. Mia returned 20 minutes later with 6 survivors. One was limping badly. Another carried a carving knife covered in blood. "West Wing's gone," Mia said. "Gone?" I asked. "Guests are turning. Staff too. Anybody bitten changes fast. Minutes, maybe less." The room erupted immediately. Questions, panic, denial. Mia raised her voice. "Listen to me. The infected can still talk sometimes. Don't trust voices through doors. Don't open anything unless you see the person clearly." "What are they?" someone whispered. Mia looked at me, then away. Hungry, she said. The limping survivor suddenly collapsed. People backed away instantly. He grabbed a shelf trying to stand. "I'm okay," he gasped. Blood soaked through his pant leg. Bite marks. Everyone saw them. Randall pointed. "Get him out of here." "He's injured," Louise snapped. "He's infected." The man started crying. "Please." I'll never forget Mia's face then. Not fear, calculation. She already understood what had to happen. That terrified me more than the infected. "Daniel," she said quietly. I knew. I hated her for making me know. The injured man kept talking, apologizing, begging. Nobody moved. Then his breathing changed. Shorter, faster. His fingers started twitching. Louise stepped backward. "No." The man looked up at us, and for 1 second he seemed completely normal. Then he lunged at the nearest employee. Chaos detonated. Shelves crashed. People screamed. I grabbed a cast iron skillet from the supply rack and hit him across the head. Once, twice. He still kept reaching. Not angry, not enraged. Hungry. Mia drove a knife into his neck. That stopped him. Silence filled the room afterward. Nobody looked at us. Nobody thanked us. Because the truth had finally arrived. This wasn't an accident inside a luxury hotel anymore. Something contagious was spreading through Blackwater Summit. And somewhere above us, Elias Voss was still trying to contain it. Around 4 in the morning, the generators failed. Not completely, just enough. The lights dimmed into a deep amber haze that turned every hallway into a nightmare version of itself. Emergency strips glowed along the floors. The heating system weakened. Outside, the storm kept burying the mountain roads. And from somewhere inside the resort came screaming. Distant. Then suddenly cut off. We'd moved the survivors into the wine cellar by then. Thick walls, single reinforced entrance, limited access points. A temporary refuge. Nothing more. Mia organized inventory while I checked supplies, water, canned goods, kitchen tools that could pass as weapons. Luis sat against the wall, staring at dried blood on his shoes. He finally looked up. "You think this is happening outside too?" Nobody answered. Because we were all thinking about the television signal, the airport, the running crowds. Randall paced near the shelves, muttering into a dead cell phone. "My wife's in Boston," he kept saying. Like repetition could reconnect the world. Then the cellar door opened. Everyone jumped. A man stumbled inside wearing a security jacket. Blood soaked one side of his neck. "Close it," he hissed. I slammed the door shut behind him. The guard collapsed against wine crates, breathing hard. "Name's Carter," he said. Mia recognized him immediately. "You were upstairs with executive security." He nodded. "Not anymore?" I handed him water. "What happened?" Carter looked at all of us before speaking. "Those guests arrived infected already." Nobody moved. "Voss knew," Carter continued. "Whole retreat was intentional." "Intentional?" Randall snapped. "Why would anyone do this?" Carter laughed once, no humor in it. "Because they weren't sick the way you think," he explained between breaths. Weeks earlier, private medical shipments had started arriving at the resort, restricted labs installed beneath the spa level, outside contractors, non-disclosure teams. Security wasn't allowed inside certain areas. Then wealthy guests began arriving in small groups, always isolated, always hungry. "Hungry for what?" Luis asked. Carter stared at him. "Protein, blood, tissue. Doesn't matter. Once they change far enough, regular food stops working." The room went silent. "You're saying this was some kind of experiment?" I asked. "Not experiment. Upgrade." Nobody liked that word. Carter continued. Voss found something overseas. Infection, parasite, mutation, call it whatever you want. Rich people started paying to receive controlled exposure. They thought it would make them stronger. Longer lifespan, faster recovery, higher cognition. That thing in the elevator didn't look upgraded, Mia said. Because containment failed. He rubbed shaking hands across his face. They lose control when they starve, and now the storm trapped everyone together. Luis looked sick. So they're just eating people? Carter nodded slowly. And every bite spreads it. The cellar suddenly felt too small, too warm. Then Carter said the worst part. Some of them can still think. A crash echoed somewhere above us, heavy, metallic. Everyone froze. Another impact, closer. Carter stood immediately. They found the service levels. Mia grabbed a flashlight. How many? Enough. We killed the lights. Darkness swallowed the cellar except for emergency strips near the floor. And then we heard them. Footsteps. Not frantic, not stumbling. Organized. Moving through the corridor outside. A voice echoed faintly. Chef Mercer? The woman in the cream coat. My stomach dropped. We know you're in there, she called calmly. Nobody breathed. Her footsteps stopped outside the door. Mr. Voss wishes to speak with you. Silence. Then softer. You're valuable to us. Luis gripped a wine opener so tightly his knuckles whitened. The woman continued. The others are frightened, but you understand hunger already, don't you? I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Because kitchens do teach hunger, sleep deprivation, desperation, the quiet cruelty behind luxury service. But not this. Never this. The handle moved slowly. Locked. Then came scratching. Not violent. Curious. Like something testing the barrier. Chef, she whispered. And suddenly her voice changed. It became Chloe's voice. The missing server. Please let me in. Luis nearly moved. Mia grabbed him instantly. Outside, multiple voices started repeating the same sentence. Please let me in. Different tones. Different people. All wrong. The scratching intensified. Then stopped. Footsteps retreated into darkness. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute afterward. Finally, Carter looked at me. If they're asking for you personally, that's bad. Why? Because intelligent infected keep what mattered before they changed. I didn't understand then, but I would. By dawn, half the resort was dark. The storm outside had become a white wall swallowing every window. No vehicles could leave. No helicopters could land. We were trapped above the clouds with infected predators wearing expensive clothing. And food was becoming a problem. Not for us. For them. Carter insisted starving infected became more aggressive, less controlled, faster. That's why Voss kept the kitchen running, he explained. He was feeding them. I looked at the storage inventory. Thousands of dollars in luxury ingredients. Seafood, prime meats, imported delicacies. Meaningless. Because the infected wanted fresh tissue now. Not cuisine. Mia studied the resort map spread across a wine barrel. Maintenance tunnels connect every wing, she said. If we reach the communications tower manually, maybe we can restore outside contact. Towers near the spa level, Carter warned. Which means near the labs, I said. Nobody liked that either. But staying hidden guaranteed death eventually. We chose a small group, me, Mia, Luis, Carter. The others remained barricaded inside the cellar. Before leaving, Randall grabbed my sleeve. If you find a signal, call Boston first. I nodded even though I knew it probably wouldn't matter. The service corridors felt abandoned. Lights flickered, steam hissed from damaged pipes. Somewhere far above us came occasional impacts and distant screams. The resort itself sounded sick. We moved quietly through laundry tunnels toward the spa sector. Halfway there, we found bodies. Not piles, not slaughter, arranged. 3 employees seated against the wall beside untouched trays of room service food, hands folded in laps, eyes open. Luis whispered, "Why would they do this?" Carter crouched near one body. "They're storing food." That sentence stayed with me. Not killing. Storing. One corpse suddenly twitched. Mia raised her knife. But the body didn't rise. Instead, something moved inside its abdomen. Skin shifted, bulged, then split. A pale thing crawled halfway out before collapsing onto the tile. Luis gagged. The creature looked unfinished. Blind. Worm-like. Carter crushed it instantly under his boot. "Move," he said. Nobody argued. The spa-level doors had been welded open. That alone terrified Carter. "Containment protocol," he muttered. The smell hit us next. Chemical disinfectant mixed with blood. Luxury spa music still played faintly through ceiling speakers. Soft piano over horror. Treatment rooms lined the hallway, most empty. Then we reached the lab. Glass walls, medical equipment, restraint chairs. And inside one chamber sat Elias Voss. Calm, perfectly dressed, waiting. "Chef Mercer," he said through the glass, "please come in." Luis whispered, "No chance." But Voss smiled slightly. "If I wanted you dead, you would not have reached this floor." Carter aimed his weapon. "Open the tower access," he demanded. Voss ignored him. His attention stayed on me. "Do you know why kitchens fascinate me, Daniel?" I said nothing. "Because civilization reveals itself through appetite, removes social rules, and people become simple very quickly. Hunger strips away performance." Behind him, I noticed restrained figures inside adjacent rooms. Some human, some not entirely. Moving. "You caused this," Mia said. Voss nodded without shame. "Humanity has always evolved through catastrophe. My guests simply embrace the next stage before others." "They're monsters." "No," he replied calmly. "They are honest." Then his expression shifted for the first time. Concern. "Unfortunately," he continued, "the infection adapted faster than expected." A crash sounded deeper in the facility. Voss glanced toward it. "They're becoming unstable." Carter stepped closer to the glass. "Restore communications." "There is no one left to contact," Voss answered. Silence. Luis shook his head. "That's impossible." Voss looked almost sympathetic. "The outbreak began in 3 major cities yesterday evening. Airports failed first. Hospitals collapsed shortly afterward. Governments are attempting containment." He paused. "Poorly." My chest tightened. The airport image on the television? Real. Outside the lab, something suddenly sprinted through the corridor. Fast, blurred. Then another. The infected were moving toward us. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Elias Voss looked afraid. The first infected hit the lab doors hard enough to crack reinforced glass. Everything collapsed into motion after that. Carter shouted for us to fall back. Luis grabbed medical supplies. Mia searched for another exit. And Elias Voss remained seated behind the glass like a man watching weather approach. The woman in the cream coat appeared in the hallway. Except now she barely resembled a person. Her spine bent strangely. Skin stretched tight along her jaw. Fingers elongated into pale hooked shapes. But her eyes still looked intelligent. That made her worse. She pressed one hand against the cracked lab glass. "Elias," she said softly. Not growled, not screamed. Spoken. Voss stood slowly. "You're deteriorating," he replied. She smiled. "We're evolving." Then she looked at me. And your chef smells afraid. More infected flooded into the corridor behind her. Some barely transformed, others twisted beyond recognition. But they all stared at us with the same starving focus. Carter opened fire. The hallway erupted. Glass shattered. Lights exploded. One infected dropped instantly. Another kept moving despite half its face missing. Mia dragged me toward a side passage. Move! Luis stumbled behind us carrying the medical bag. I looked back once. Elias Voss was still inside the lab, standing perfectly still while the infected approached him. And he wasn't resisting. The last thing I saw before the doors sealed was the woman touching his face almost tenderly. Then the corridor lockdown activated. Steel barriers slammed downward between us and the infected. Temporary separation. Nothing more. We ran through maintenance tunnels beneath the spa. The sounds above us echoed through ventilation shafts. Screaming, metal impacts, animal feeding noises. Luis finally broke. What the hell are those things? Nobody answered immediately. Then Mia spoke while moving. Rich people bought themselves a plague. Carter shook his head. Not just rich people anymore. We reached a generator junction room near the communications tower. The door had already been forced open. Inside, 3 maintenance workers lay dead. Or almost dead. One still breathed weakly. Older man. Missing part of his shoulder. He saw us and started crying immediately. Don't leave me! Luis rushed toward him. Carter blocked him. No! He's alive! For now. The injured worker grabbed my apron sleeve. Please. His eyes were still human. Completely human. That was the hardest part. I looked at the bite wound, already darkening, veins spreading. Minutes left at most. Mia crouched beside him. What happened here? Tower relay failed, he whispered. Something got into the vents. He started shaking violently. Please don't let me become one of them. No dramatic speech, no noble acceptance. Just terror. Pure human terror. Luis backed away. There has to be another way. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. The worker looked at me specifically. Maybe because I was older. Maybe because chefs spend years making decisions under pressure. Or maybe because I looked capable of doing ugly things. Please, he whispered again. I took Carter's sidearm. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. The worker closed his eyes. One shot. The sound rang through the room like a bell. Nobody spoke afterward. Not even Carter. Because something changes inside you after the first time. Not strength, not numbness. Permission. The communications tower wasn't entirely dead. That became our next problem. Emergency systems still had intermittent power, which meant there was a chance, small, fragile, desperate, that we could send an external distress signal. But the relay controls sat 2 floors above us, across the grand atrium. The atrium had become feeding territory. We discovered that from the security monitors. Dozens of infected moved through the lobby, some wandering, some crouched over bodies, some simply standing motionless beneath chandeliers, waiting. Snow blew through shattered windows. Luxury furniture lay overturned, blood-streaked marble floors. Blackwater Summit looked like civilization after impact. Luis stared at the screens. How many are there? Carter answered quietly. Too many to fight through directly. Mia pointed toward the industrial kitchen corridors. Service elevators connect behind the atrium. I understood her immediately. The gas lines. She nodded. The resort kitchen systems were massive. Commercial pressure lines, backup fuel reserves, ventilation controls. For the first time since the outbreak started, I saw an actual strategy. Not escape, not survival. Control. We moved back toward the main kitchen level. The halls were quieter now. That scared me more than noise. Infection had changed the resort's rhythm. The creatures hunted in bursts, then disappeared into silence, like coordinated predators. When we reached the kitchen, the sight nearly broke me. Hours earlier, it had been my world. Organized chaos, heat, movement, purpose. Now it looked abandoned after war. Pots overturned, blood near prep stations, steam drifting through dead lights. And hanging above the central island was Luis's friend Mateo. Not intentionally. His jacket had caught on the overhead rack while he fell. Luis froze. He couldn't even speak. Then somewhere nearby came chewing. Slow, wet. We moved carefully past the line stations. A figure crouched near the butcher block. One of the banquet guests, still wearing a tuxedo. It looked up at us with cloudy eyes, mouth covered red. Then it spoke. Hungry. Carter fired instantly. The shot echoed through the kitchen, and from distant hallways came answering sounds, movement. A lot of movement. Go! Mia shouted. We split tasks immediately. Carter barricaded the main entrances. Luis reopened fuel access valves. Mia rerouted ventilation controls. I headed for the industrial ovens. Every kitchen has a breaking point. Temperature, pressure, timing. If we overloaded the gas systems beneath the atrium, the explosion wouldn't destroy the whole resort, but it might collapse enough structure to block infected movement. Maybe buy survivors time. Maybe kill us too. While working, I found myself staring at my own reflection in stainless steel surfaces. Blood on my apron. Smoke in my hair. Eyes older than they had been yesterday. I realized something then. I wasn't thinking about rescue anymore. Only containment. That terrified me. Because Elias Voss had started with the same logic. Sacrifice a few to protect the future. The difference between survival and monstrosity can disappear very quietly. The pounding began before we finished preparations. Kitchen doors shaking. Voices outside. Chef Mercer? The woman again. Closer now. You understand us more every hour. Luis whispered, don't answer her. But I did. You killed innocent people. A pause. Then soft laughter. So do famines. So do wars. So do governments. Hunger only removes excuses. The doors bent inward slightly. Join us, she said. And I hate admitting this. Part of me hesitated. Not because I wanted infection. Because I was exhausted. And the promise of no longer being afraid sounded dangerously close to relief. Then I remembered Mateo hanging above the kitchen line, and Chloe disappearing beneath the banquet table. Fear wasn't the enemy. Losing your humanity was. I ignited the gas sequence. The kitchen timers began counting down. 3 minutes. And outside the doors, the infected finally stopped pretending to be patient. The assault hit all at once. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The infected burst through the kitchen entrances faster than any crowd I'd ever seen. Not stumbling corpses, not slow monsters. Starving bodies moving with desperate intelligence. Carter opened fire while Mia dragged Luis toward the service elevators. I stayed behind long enough to trigger the final pressure override. The woman in the cream coat saw me immediately. She moved differently now, almost fluid. Daniel, she said. Not hostile, inviting. Then she sprinted. I barely reached the elevator before she slammed against the closing doors. Her fingers slipped through the gap. Long, bone-thin. Luis screamed and hacked at her hand with a cleaver. The doors sealed. The elevator dropped. Above us came impacts against steel, then shrieking. Then the explosion. The entire shaft shook violently. Lights died. Heat blasted through the vents. The elevator halted between floors. Everything went dark. For several seconds, none of us moved. Then emergency lighting flickered weakly red. Carter checked upward. Atrium's gone, he muttered. Dust poured through the shaft ceiling. Somewhere far above us came collapsing structure. And beneath that, screaming. Not human. The infected were burning. Luis started laughing. Not because it was funny, because shock had nowhere else to go. Did we kill them? Carter didn't answer. Because deep down we already knew. Not enough. We forced the elevator hatch open manually and climbed into maintenance access. The communications relay room was only one floor above. The climb felt endless. Smoke drifted through the shaft. Metal groaned around us. Halfway up, Mia stopped suddenly. Listen. Footsteps. Above us. Descending. Slow, controlled. Not many. One. Carter raised his weapon. A figure appeared through the smoke. Elias Voss. Burned across one side of his face. Suit torn, but alive. He looked less human now. Veins dark beneath his skin. Eyes reflecting light strangely. Yet he still carried himself with impossible composure. You destroyed years of work, he said calmly. You infected the world, Mia snapped. Voss continued climbing downward toward us. The world was already dying. We simply accelerated adaptation. Luis shouted, People are being eaten. Voss actually looked confused by the outrage. People have always consumed one another. Economically, politically, physically during famine. Your species romanticizes its own brutality. Carter aimed directly at his head. Stay back. Voss ignored him. Do you know why the infected fixate on hunger? Because hunger is honest. Civilization is the mask. Then he looked at me. And you know that better than anyone, Chef. Maybe he was trying to manipulate me. Maybe he believed it. That's what made him dangerous. He truly thought this nightmare revealed truth. The shaft trembled again. Structural damage spreading. Voss extended one hand toward me. Come with me. The intelligent strain can survive what comes next. Below us, infected screams echoed through collapsing corridors. Above us, the relay room waited. And between those two directions stood a man offering survival at the cost of becoming something else. I thought about taking it. For one horrifying second. Then Carter fired. The bullet hit Voss in the chest. He staggered backward. Not dead. Just surprised. Then the damaged ladder section beneath him snapped. Voss fell into darkness. The screaming below intensified instantly. Something was feeding. We kept climbing. None of us looked down. The communications relay room overlooked the eastern side of the mountain. By the time we reached it, dawn had finally broken through the storm clouds. Gray light flooded the snowfields outside. And what we saw beyond Blackwater Summit killed the last illusion that this was isolated. Smoke columns rose from distant towns. Highways below the mountain were frozen with abandoned vehicles. Some burning, some overturned. No emergency response, no helicopters. No movement except scattered figures between the cars. Even from that distance, I knew what they were. Luis stared through the glass. Oh my God. The world had already changed overnight. Carter powered the emergency relay systems while Mia barricaded entrances. The room smelled like dust and overheated electronics. Every few minutes, the structure beneath us groaned from damage caused by the explosion. Blackwater Summit was dying slowly around us. I have signal, Carter said finally. Hope hit the room so hard it hurt. He grabbed the emergency microphone. This is Blackwater Summit Resort requesting immediate evacuation support. Biological outbreak in progress. Multiple infected hostile entities. Repeat. Static interrupted him. Then another voice answered. Military. Tense. Identify containment zone. Carter gave coordinates quickly. Silence followed. Then, Remain in place. Air response unavailable. Regional quarantine protocols active. Mia stepped closer. There are civilians trapped here. The voice hesitated. Current projections indicate national spread. Prioritize isolation from infected individuals. Rescue operations suspended until further notice. Luis looked stunned. You're just leaving us here? No response. Only static. Then one final transmission. If infection symptoms appear, do not approach population centers. The line died. That was it. No rescue, no plan, just containment. Outside, snow continued falling over a collapsing country. Then we heard pounding below the relay room. The infected had reached the stairwell. We couldn't hold the relay room long term. Too many access points. Too few supplies. Carter suggested escaping through the eastern maintenance trail once weather conditions eased. Mia disagreed immediately. The roads below are infected zones now. Staying here gets us killed, Carter replied. Luis sat near the radio console, staring blankly. I understood the paralysis. The human brain handles small disasters badly. Global collapse is something else entirely. Then the relay monitors flickered. Security feeds, still partially operational. We watched infected moving through the lower resort, some feeding, some wandering, some standing together motionless as if listening to something distant. Then one camera showed the wine cellar. My stomach dropped. The barricade had failed. Bodies covered the floor. Survivors we'd left behind were gone, or changed. One figure slowly lifted its head toward the camera. Randall. Blood covered his mouth. And behind him stood the woman in the cream coat. Completely still, watching the camera directly. She smiled. The screen cut to static. Luis whispered, "She knows where we are." The pounding downstairs intensified. Carter checked ammunition. Almost empty. Mia looked at me. How well do you know the mountain trails? Not well enough in this weather. Better than staying. She was right. We gathered winter gear from emergency lockers, rations, signal flares, a hunting rifle with limited ammunition. Before leaving, I looked across the ruined landscape outside one final time. The world felt silent in a way that didn't belong to nature. No aircraft, no traffic, no distant city noise, just snowfall over catastrophe. The stairwell doors burst inward. 3 infected charged into the relay room. Carter shot the first instantly. The second slammed into equipment. Sparks exploded. The third reached Luis. I hit it with a steel emergency tool hard enough to crack bone. It still grabbed him. Luis screamed. Mia drove a knife through its eye socket. The creature collapsed. Luis stared at his arm. Blood. Bite marks. Nobody spoke. He looked at us already knowing. No, he whispered. I wanted to lie. I couldn't. Carter checked the wound. Maybe shallow. But we all saw the discoloration spreading beneath the skin. Luis started shaking. I don't want to turn into that thing. The pounding downstairs became louder. More infected climbing. Mia's eyes filled for the first time since this began. We have to move, she whispered. Luis looked at me specifically. Same as the maintenance worker. Not because I was strongest. Because somewhere during this nightmare, I became the person who finished unbearable decisions. I hated that. More than the infected. More than Elias Voss. Luis backed away suddenly. No! Terror overtook him. No, I can still help. He grabbed supplies with trembling hands. Please don't leave me here. Nobody moved. Then the stairwell doors began bending inward. Time vanished. Luis saw it in our faces. And finally understood. He started crying silently. I don't want to be hungry, he whispered. That sentence almost destroyed me. We left the relay room through the eastern maintenance route with the infected seconds behind us. Snow hammered the mountainside hard enough to blind distance. The trail wound downwards through pine forest beneath the resort cliffs. Blackwater's summit loomed above us like a dying fortress, smoke drifting from shattered windows. Luis walked between me and Mia, weakening. Every 10 minutes he stopped to breathe. The infection moved fast, too fast. Carter scouted ahead with the rifle while we descended through deep snow. Around noon, we found the first evidence that the outbreak had reached the surrounding towns completely. Bodies near abandoned snowmobiles, cabins burned empty, blood across frozen roads. No survivors, just silence. Luis leaned against a tree. "I'm cold," he murmured. His skin had turned pale gray, veins darkening around his throat. Mia knelt beside him. "Stay awake." He looked at her weakly. "Do you think they still feel human inside?" Nobody answered. Because we didn't know. And maybe we were afraid of the answer. Then Carter froze. Movement. Figures emerged between the trees downhill. Not resort infected. Local people. Or what used to be local people. At least 15. Some partially transformed, some barely changed at all. Which meant the outbreak outside wasn't evolving identically. Different strains, different stages. The creatures moved toward us after catching scent. Fast. We ran. Snow collapsed beneath our boots. Branches whipped our faces. Luis fell twice. The infected gained ground quickly. Then the mountain answered with something worse. An avalanche crack echoed across the ridge. The explosion from the resort had destabilized upper snow shelves. Mia looked upward. "Run!" The mountainside collapsed behind us. White thunder. Trees snapped. Snow roared through the valley. The infected vanished beneath it instantly. We barely reached a rocky outcrop before the avalanche tore through the trail. When it ended, silence returned. But Carter was gone, buried somewhere beneath tons of snow. Luis stared at the destruction numbly. "We can't keep losing everyone." No one answered because survival had become subtraction. That was the real horror. Not the infected. The arithmetic. By nightfall, only 3 of us remained. Me, Mia, Luis. We found temporary shelter inside an abandoned ranger station overlooking the frozen valley. The generator was dead, but the fireplace still worked. For the first time since the outbreak began, we sat somewhere quiet. No alarms, no luxury lies. No marble hallways filled with predators. Just cold wind outside and the sound of wood burning. Luis sat wrapped in blankets near the fire. He looked worse every hour. Sweating, shivering, eyes unfocused. Mia cleaned her knife silently. I stared through the cracked window toward distant smoke on the horizon. Civilization dying one fire at a time. "I keep thinking about the banquet," Mia said eventually. Her voice sounded exhausted for the first time. "Those people chose this." "Voss promised evolution," I replied. "No, he promised superiority." That distinction mattered to her. Luis laughed weakly. "Rich people ended the world because dying scared them." Nobody argued. Then he looked at me. "When this started, you thought about leaving, didn't you?" I nodded. "In the freezer. First night. Why didn't you?" I thought about the answer carefully. Because kitchens teach you to stay during disaster. He smiled faintly. "That's kind of stupid." "Yeah." Silence settled again. Then Luis suddenly stiffened. His breathing changed. Mia looked at me immediately. We both knew. Luis saw it too. "Not yet," he whispered. But his fingers were twitching already, veins spreading darker beneath the skin. He started crying quietly. I can feel it inside me. I moved beside him. Luis, I'm hungry all the time now. That sentence broke something in Mia. She turned away immediately. Luis grabbed my sleeve. Promise me something. I nodded. Don't let me hurt anyone. Outside, distant howls echoed through the valley. Not wolves. The infected were spreading through the mountains. Luis looked toward the sound, and for one horrifying second, hunger crossed his face. Not metaphorical, physical. He noticed my reaction immediately. Do it now, he whispered. I couldn't. Not yet. Then the station door rattled. All three of us froze. A voice called softly from outside. Chef Mercer. The woman in the cream coat. Somehow she'd survived the explosion. And found us. The infected surrounded the ranger station slowly. Not rushing, not attacking. Waiting. Through cracks in the boarded windows, I saw shapes moving between snow-covered trees. Dozens. Some barely human anymore. Some still recognizable. The woman stood closest to the front porch. Snow settled across her pale shoulders. You can't keep running, she called. Luis covered his ears, like hearing her physically hurt. Mia loaded the last rifle rounds. If they rush us, aim center mass and keep moving, she said. But even she sounded tired now. The woman continued speaking. The hunger gets quieter once you stop resisting. Luis looked up sharply, because part of him wanted to believe her. I understood that too well. Fear exhausts people. Pain exhausts people. The infected weren't just spreading disease. They were offering surrender. The station windows trembled under impacts. More infected gathering. Luis suddenly stood. I can distract them. No, Mia snapped. I'm already changing. He looked at me. You know I am. I did. His pupils had started whitening. His breathing carried that same wet hunger sound I'd heard in the banquet hall. Still human, but slipping. The woman smiled outside. He belongs with us now. Luis screamed at her. Shut up! Then he collapsed against the wall, shaking violently. Mia whispered, Daniel. I knew. Again. Always me. Luis looked terrified. Please hurry before I change my mind. I held the rifle so tightly my hands hurt. He tried smiling. At least I won't have to wash dishes tomorrow. Dark humor. One last attempt at being himself. Then his expression twisted suddenly. Hunger. Real hunger. He lunged halfway toward Mia before stopping himself with a scream. Now! The shot echoed through the station. Outside, every infected went silent instantly. I caught Luis before he hit the floor. Warm blood across my hands. His eyes cleared for half a second, then faded. Mia looked destroyed. But the infected outside had changed too. Agitated now. Restless. The woman stared through the window directly at me, and for the first time she looked angry. You deny what you are, she hissed. I stepped toward the door. Mia grabbed my arm. What are you doing? I looked at the fuel cans beside the fireplace, then at the infected outside, then toward the mountains behind the station. Dry forest, heavy wind, fire, containment. Elias Voss's logic returning again. But this time for a different reason. We end it here, I said. Mia understood immediately. We soaked the station walls with fuel while the infected clawed at entrances. The woman kept watching silently, almost mournful. Then the doors burst inward. The infected charged. I threw the lantern. Fire swallowed the ranger station instantly. Heat exploded outward. Smoke, screaming. Mia and I escaped through the rear window into deep snow as flames consumed the building. The surrounding forest ignited quickly in the wind. The infected trapped inside burned first, then the others. The woman in the cream coat stood inside the doorway engulfed in flames, still staring at me, still smiling, until the roof collapsed. Mia and I kept walking through the snow without looking back. Behind us, the mountain burned against the night, and somewhere far below, the world kept ending. 3 months have passed since Blackwater Summit. At least I think it's been 3 months. Time became unreliable after governments collapsed. Mia and I survived by staying mobile. Small towns, empty ranger cabins, places the infected moved through too quickly to settle. The broadcast stopped weeks ago. Most cities are gone now, but not all humanity. That matters. We've met survivors, scared people, violent people, good people trying very hard not to become cruel. And every time someone cooks over a campfire, they hand me the pan automatically, like muscle memory, like the world before. Sometimes I still smell that freezer from the first night. Sweet rot, wet heat, the warning I ignored. I think about Elias Voss often, about hunger, about how quickly civilization peels away under pressure. He was wrong about one thing. Hunger doesn't reveal what humans are. It reveals what humans choose. And every day we survive without becoming monsters feels like the last honest victory left in the world.